one thing that I did not know is that there was a difference between a doula and a midwife. So explain the difference between a doula, a midwife, and what was the third one? What
Or
was it?
OBGYN.
OBGYN.
Right, right. So I always like to say they're the two oldest professions are what?
OBG. Oh,
Not
mm.
OBGYN.
A streetwalker.
Walker, also known as a prostitute, and a midwife. Two
Yes.
oldest professions. The profession of obstetrics and gynecology, physicians, that's a fairly
I
new
cannot.
profession. It's a true story. The Bible talks about the midwives, right?
Mhm.
So basically, midwife, it means with
Mhm.
women. So nurse midwives now, that is a newer profession. Okay. Nurses first, registered nurses, and then midwives. Nurse midwives really came about as a way to create a midwife that could be subjugated underneath doctors or subjected to doctors' orders.
Mhm.
The original traditional midwives, the granny midwives, right? They were autonomous free women. They were in the class of the witches and the healers. They were powerful and feared, you know. And they did the work, and they were called. And the community, it wasn't about going to school and paying money and getting a certificate and now you can practice. It was about usually an older midwife who was ready to retire would train you. She would choose you, train you, and then the community would see that you were associated and affiliated with her, and then they would accept you. So it was more of a preceptorship type model, and a calling, you know. And in every indigenous culture, they have midwives. Um, then physicians came into play, and physicians originally were wealthy white men, owning white men who self-selected, community and select them. They selected themselves. They created their schools. They gave themselves certificates, and they started to practice. And the midwife had, as being the person to attend births, had a lot of work in that arena, right? People are always being born, and especially back in the day, people having 5, 6, 7 kids. And so, if you look at the history of how midwives were pushed out, it was really for economic reasons,
Mhm.
because physicians wanted to have um, more of a place in that industry. And so, propaganda, they're dirty, they're uneducated, because midwives were also involved in
Mm.
abortion, right? All type of work along the reproductive lifespan, right? You mean, why would you go to anybody else? You're pregnant, you're continuing the pregnancy, you're pregnant and you don't want to continue, you're going to go to the same person.
Right.
And so that was part of
Right.
how they were
Right.
demonized and pushed out. And then this whole nurse midwife thing was created so that you could still keep your pulse on the nurse midwife, which is why 97% of nurse midwives work in a hospital.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Mm.
I won't say the boldest of us are outside of the hospital, but to some degree, the boldest of us are outside of the hospital, outside of the system, outside of the capitalistic, technocratic, physician dominated system.
Wow.
So,
Wow. Thank you. I would really appreciate the
and and
information.
and last but not least at all, a doula is a practical support in birth, making sure you stay uplifted, lifting your morale, helping you get into different positions, keeping you fed, keeping you nourished, being there with you from the very beginning to the very end, right? Um, the word means servant. So, in every way that a birthing person would need service, a doula is to do that. They don't really focus on the medical aspect of it. They're not checking your cervix. They're not giving you medications. Um, they're right there by your side through the whole entire thing. Ideally,
Mhm.
we're not going to talk about the new doulas out there,
Mm.
but some of the new doulas, unfortunately, just want to show up in active labor. But that's not how it was originally. Not when I first came into this work. And then OBGYNs are physicians, but they're surgeons, and essentially they're pathologists, meaning that they deal with pathology, like when things are wrong.
Hmm.
I always say, if you need your teeth cleaned, do you want to go with a hygienist or do you want to go with an oral surgeon?
Mm.
Because an oral surgeon is going to want to do surgery because that's what they like to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so, is there any wonder why our C-section rate is like 30%? Because everyone's going to surgeons and thinking they're not going to get surgery. No, you're going to get surgery because that's what surgeons do. Mhm.
So you
Mm-hmm.
can have a midwife and a doula.
Oh, absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Ideally, everyone has a doula. I mean, I had a doula. I didn't know she was a doula. She was comfortable with birth, and she was my companion, so I didn't feel alone. You know,
Yeah,
we
I love that. And that's so important too, especially when you're going through that process, and you don't know everything. You have that person right by you that if you have questions, you can call them and ask them, and they don't, push you one way or another, but they can provide you with the information so that you can work with your midwife to make a decision that's best for you and